In the wake of any tragedy involving gun violence, we see the return of a familiar call to ban guns.
If in fact we could say, by the way, you can't own the following weapons, period.
I'm the only candidate on this stage calling for a ban of every single assault weapon in America.
Hell yes, we're gonna take your AR-15, your AK-47.
In the mind of both the left and the legacy media, there is no other solution to curb crime and violence. However, the fact is that gun ownership is a massive crime deterrent, with study after study showing this to be true. As just one example, here's how an unusual city ordinance passed in a suburb outside of Atlanta, Georgia, proved just that. While Kennesaw, Georgia has grown quite a bit with the addition of Kennesaw State University, in 1982 it was a relatively quiet suburb of Atlanta, with a population of about 5,000. At the time, Kennesaw City Council decided to pass an ordinance requiring all heads of households to possess a firearm at home.
It was meant to be kind of a crime deterrent, and it was also more or less a political statement because the city of Morton Grove, Illinois had passed a city ordinance banning handguns from their city limit.
This new ordinance, however, would lead to startling results in crime reduction.
For the average person, for the overwhelming majority of Americans who are not criminals, it makes them safer.
Professor Gary Kleck, a criminologist and professor emeritus at Florida State University, detailed the outcome of the city ordinance in a 1988 study for the academic journal Social Problems. In the 7 months following passage of the ordinance, there were only 5 reported residential burglaries, compared to 45 in the same period in the previous year, an 89% decrease. This drop was far in excess of the modest 10.4% decrease in the burglary rate experienced by Georgia and the 9.6% decrease for the entire United States. This ordinance has remained in place for decades, even as the town continues to grow.
It gives me the ability to protect myself, as opposed to being somewhere where you weren't allowed to have a firearm or it was frowned upon.
And this is just one of the many examples Kleck provided on the subject of legal gun ownership as a highly effective deterrent against crime. In the same study, Kleck noted that subway robberies decreased by 43% in New York City after an armed citizen used a handgun to wound 4 robbers. Kleck also noted that there may have been some correlative value to that finding due to an additional increase in police presence. Elsewhere in the study, Kleck detailed how, in 1967, the Orlando Police Department trained 2,500 women in the use of firearms after a spike in sexual assaults. As a result, incidents of rape plummeted by 89% in Orlando, while the rape rate remained constant in the rest of Florida and in the United States. Not only did training a large number of women in the proper use of firearms act as a massive deterrent against sexual assault, Kleck noted that it prevented other criminal activity as well, pointing out that it also led to a substantial drop in burglaries throughout the city. Kleck's tireless research going back decades alongside Kennesaw's unusual but effective city ordinance demonstrates time and again that a civilian population trained in the proper use of firearms serves as an effective deterrent against violence and crime. And Kleck's findings on the Kennesaw City Ordinance are simply part of a broad slew of statistical evidence that guns help rather than hinder the prevention of crime. For example, guns prevent up to 2.5 million crimes a year, or 6,849 every day. Most often, the gun is never fired and no blood, including the criminals, is shed. Every year, 400,000 life-threatening violent crimes are prevented using firearms. 60% of convicted felons admitted that they avoided committing crimes when they knew the victim was armed. 40% of convicted felons admitted that they avoided committing crimes when they thought the victim might be armed. Felons report that they avoid entering houses where people are at home because they fear being shot. Fewer than 1% of firearms are used in the commission of a crime. The Heritage Foundation also provides an extensive database of Americans who successfully defended their liberties, lives, or livelihoods with the lawful use of a firearm. The database is reinforced by the findings of the CDC and provides conclusive evidence contrary to the usual anti-gun rhetoric. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Heritage Foundation said, almost every major study on defensive gun use has found that Americans use their firearms defensively between 500,000 and 3 million times each year. There's good reason to believe that most defensive gun uses are never reported to law enforcement, much less picked up by local or national media outlets. It highlights just a fraction of the incredible number of times Americans relied on the Second Amendment, not the government getting there in time, to protect their inalienable rights. Despite the limitations on data, these confirmed cases of defensive gun use help prove that the good guy with a gun is not a myth, but an integral part of American society. Finally, as Amy Swearer of the Daily Signal put it while documenting a list of Americans who successfully defended themselves with a firearm in 1 month alone, the exercise of Second Amendment rights in defense of self or others is not a rare or extraordinary event, but a daily occurrence in the lives of ordinary Americans doing ordinary things.
If you're going to commit a crime in Kennesaw, and you're the criminal, are you going to take a chance that that homeowner is a law-abiding citizen?